Okay, so let's get right into it here and just start to look at the things that we can see concerning the life of Jesus. And we're coming to the wedding feast at Cana, but just before we get there, what I want to do is look at so we're looking at the first week of Jesus in his ministry leading up to um, the wedding feast at Cana, and I'll show you how this works. The first thing we have is day one is John's testimony about Jesus. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And then we have John's encounter with Jesus, and he calls that the next day. John, the gospel writer, calls that the next day. And then two of his disciples, one of whom is Andrew, Peter's brother, is referred to Jesus, and they go and follow him. And then Andrew introduces Peter to Jesus. That's day 4. And then the next day, Philip and Nathanael follow Jesus. They ask him, where are you staying, or where are you sleeping, where are you remaining? He says, come and see. And then from there they travel up to Galilee, which I will put up a map and show you the distance that they did walk. And that is on the third day from that time, from Philip and Nathanael going and seeing where Jesus was staying, we have the wedding feast at Cana, and it takes them at least 3 days, or on the third day, that's where they are. They're up there. So you have at least a week right there of Jesus' life, meeting his first disciples and lining up to the first sign, which is changing water into wine at the wedding feast at Cana. And we'll take a look at that right now. So John writes, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves a good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. I just want to stop right there for a minute so we can take a look at this. So there it is on the third day. So we've got the end of that week, and mother of Jesus is with him. Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding also. And right off the bat, John tells us, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus says to her, woman, what does that have to do with us? What do you want me to do about this? And he says to her very interesting words, my hour has not yet come. Now, I would say that's one of the things you should pay attention to when you read the Gospel of John, just this whole idea of when Jesus talks about his hour. And he says to her, my hour has not yet come. And then Mary turns to the servants and says, whatever he tells you to do, just do that. Now, some people think, was Jesus being rude when he said, woman, what does that have to do with us? And the consensus is that really calling your mother woman in this sense, in America, this would not be really a good thing to do. But it was an address of honor toward Mary that Jesus is doing, or Jesus is using when he calls her woman, is a better way to say that. And that's why she just turns to the servants and says, whatever he says to you, do it. Very important part of this whole thing, that they have to obey Jesus. Now, there's several things going on here. When we talk about layers, it just looks like, okay, here's a scene, the wine runs out, Jesus is going to perform a miracle, turns water into wine. The headmaster, or the guy who's running the wedding, goes to the bridegroom and says, everybody serves the good wine first, and then after people have drunk freely, they go and give him the poorer wine, because they really can't tell the difference once they've had, a few glasses of wine or cups of wine or whatever. And so that just seems like one of the things that's going on there. But there's some really exact things, and let's try to look down at some of the layers that are here. When John mentions that there are 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, why does he mention stone water pots? Why not ceramic water pots or clay water pots? But these are stone water pots. And the reason being is that the Jews believed that stone would keep the water pure, where ceramic or clay would make the water impure, because this is for when the guests come, they would wash their hands and their feet, perhaps even their face, and wouldn't be impure. It wouldn't be impure for them. They wouldn't be made impure by using impure water as they came in. And John accurately mentions that there's 6 water pots and they're empty. Well, why are they empty? Well, they've just had a whole bunch of guests come through the door and use these water pots to purify themselves. And Jesus says, let's use them, fill them up. The miracle happens, turns water into wine. And, they're like I mentioned, there are just several layers here. This is the first sign that he's using. Well, why does John mention this as the first sign? Weddings in Judea or in first century Palestine, in first century Judaism, was the largest family celebration you could have. This was like the biggest event that would go on in your family's life. Certainly, we don't know who the bridegroom is. We don't know who the bride is. All we know is that John uses this event to show something new has happened. Jesus brings new wine to the whole nation of Israel. And it's not worse than the first, it's better than the first. He says, the headmaster says, everybody serves the best wine first, and then after everyone has drunk freely, we bring out the poorer wine. He says, you saved the best for last. And John's making the statement now that Jesus is bringing something totally new to Israel, to Judea, to the Jews, to the promised or the elect people of God. He's bringing them something brand new to them, and it's better than the first. He's comparing it. He's going to compare Jesus to Moses, or grace and truth to the law. And he's just showing us this great thing that's happened here. And it's just in a very simple sense. In a very simple way, he shows us this wedding feast and brings out this great truth that Jesus is better than the Old Testament law system. He's going to show us that he's better than all of the other institutes that were, whether they be festivals, any kind of celebration, especially the Sabbath. And we'll see Jesus so-called violate the Sabbath several times, because he shows who he is, and that he's the Lord. So that's just the first thing that happens. And we see there that Jesus, his disciples are there, his mother and his brothers are there. They're all there to witness these things. And it says, this beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now remember, we looked at John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, that John, the gospel writer, says to us that he included these signs so that you may believe. That you may believe, that when you see the signs Jesus did, at least the hearers or the readers of John's gospel, that they would believe, and that believing they would find life in his name. they would find life in Jesus Christ. And this is the beginning of it. And then from here, we're going to see Jesus go to Jerusalem and have his encounter with the Jews, really the first encounter in John's Gospel that Jesus has is over the temple. Now, let me just give you another little sidebar here. John is not writing chronologically, and he is using images that people in the first century Palestine, first century Jews, Hellenistic Jews, those who have been chased out of Jerusalem because of the Roman attack on the city or the Roman war with the Jews. These are people that need to hear the gospel and hear it clearly and see that Jesus is better than everything else that's come along, that he is the promised one of Israel. And this is what John is going to do. So the next thing we're going to see, not only, well, let me put it in context here, sorry if I'm babbling a little bit, but first we see that Jesus uses this wedding, which is this great image, that you see in Judea, basically, among Jews, let me say it that way, that a wedding is this great thing, this great celebration. But now what we see is that Jesus is bringing something new. He's got something to really celebrate. And John's going to unfold that through his gospel. He's going to unfold how Jesus is better than all these other things. So that's our part right now. We look at this. We look at the wedding feast, how Jesus sets it all, or John sets it all up, and Jesus does his first sign, and he manifests his glory by his power. And it's not just turning water into wine, but showing everyone that what he has is better than what came along before him, and that God has saved the best for last. That's what we see here in the wedding feast of Cana. We'll see you next time.